Hello mga kababayan and welcome back to Pinoy Channel. So as you know, Ernest, last month, sinelebrate natin yung International Museum Day. Alam mo, kahit saang lugar sa mundo, kahit saang city, merong museum. At hindi naiiba ang Saskatoon, meron tayong museum. At yun ang papasyalan natin ngayon.
Yes, tama ka dyan, Kuya Gani. Here in Saskatoon, actually, so we are home of one of the largest human museum here in Saskatchewan. So founded in 1949, this museum has been preserving the most eventful and wonderful events all over Saskatchewan. And even the rest of Canada, actually, Kuya Gani. And mga ka-Pinoy Channel, 69 years later, this museum has still making history itself. Ayan.
Hulaan ko yan, Ernest. Ito yung Western Development Museum, Saskatoon, or yung tinatawag nilang 1910 BOOMTOWN.
Yes.
Kaya papasukin na natin ito. Naiintriga ako bakit nila tinawag itong 1910 BOOMTOWN. So, papasok tayo sa Western Development Museum and then magtatanong tayo ng mga bagay-bagay kung ano yung mga nasa loob. So, samahan nyo kami mga ka-Pinoy Channel. Let's go, Ernest!
Alright!
Hello mga ka-Pinoy Channel. So today we're very proud to be joined by Mr. Jason Wall. He is the manager of the Western Development Museum, Saskatoon. So welcome to Pinoy Channel.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah,
Welcome,
pleasure.
Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thanks for greeting us.
So tell us a little bit about the Western Development Museum, Saskatoon.
Okay, the Western Development Museum is actually one of 4 branches of the Western Development Museum. We have other locations in Yorkton, North Balford, and Moose Jaw, and of course here in Saskatoon. The whole museum got set up in the 1940s, and it was as a result of Americans coming up after the war and taking all our metal tractors, melting them down to recover the steel. So a group of individuals got together and decided they wanted to preserve that heritage, and voila, we have the Western Development Museum. This particular location was actually built in 1972, and if you talk to some old-timers in Saskatoon, they'll remember actually they were aircraft hangars that were moved from Swift Current up to Saskatoon, and it was on 11th Street where you would have found this museum. Again, up until 1972 when this particular facility was built.
Alright, so Jason, can you tell us a little bit more about the rare finds in the museum that we can find here?
We have lots of treasures. I was going through and looking through our artifact collection while I was preparing for this interview, and one of the neat ones I think is a straw gas car, and that was an invention that came about in 1919 out of the University of Saskatchewan when a professor of chemistry decided that he was going to try and power a car using straw that was rotting and the gas coming off of that to fuel it. So that's one of the interesting ones. And then, okay, so that's from 1919. Jump forward to the 2000s, and we have one of the more popular underground mining vehicles called the Gopher, which is an electronic vehicle, and it's developed by Papa Bravo Industries that are based out of Saskatoon here. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. I guess it's now time, Ernest, to show our viewers what's inside.
Absolutely.
The
So mga
museum.
ka-Pinoy Channel, so tara na, pasok tayo.
Come on.
What
Let's
he
go
said.
in. Yes.
Yeah, what we have here is a model or a diorama that loosely, very loosely portrays what Saskatoon would have looked like at the turn of the century. The first train didn't get out to Saskatoon until 1883, and at the time it was called the Coppell Long Lake Saskatchewan train. Now, the museum is very fortunate. We have a wonderful group of volunteers called the Saskatoon Railroad Modelers. Not to be confused with the model railroaders, because they're anything but model railroaders. They're more railroad modelers. Anyways, they put this together and they maintain it, and they're one of many volunteer groups that are affiliated or associated with the Western Development Museum. Now, this is a very popular exhibit for children and families, in particular young families are coming here. And because I think Ernesto's the youngest of us here, I think he should push it to go.
Alright, mga ka-Pinoy Channel, press ko na po Ayun.
There you go.
So mag-start siya doon. Abangan natin, palabas yung train.
In 1883, a group of New Brunswick investors formed the Coppell Long Lake and Saskatchewan Railway and Steamboat Company, known as the QLL&S, and received a charter for the 410
Coppell.
So it's a Cree word?
Yes, actually. Actually, no, it's kind of
soon ran into financial difficulties.
French.
As a result, the railway did not reach Saskatoon.
French word and probably used by Métis. There's a whole legend about the story of how Coppell got its name, which is I believe it's a Cree legend.
That sounds like French too, right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Sounds like French.
And that's a neat thing about Saskatoon's history is the influence of French and Scottish, First Nation, and European. And that's a very interesting thing to talk about because we've been talking earlier about immigration patterns and stuff like that. And comparing kind of the Filipino experience to what happened at the turn of the century when people came out west, sort of thing. Of course, fortunately nowadays we have different ways of travel, such as the train and airplane, bus, and stuff like that. Back in the day, it would take you something like, when the train first came out, it went to Moose Jaw. So you'd get to Moose Jaw, you'd unpack, and then you'd buy oxen or horses or wagons, load them all up, and then it was something like a 10-day trek to get to Saskatoon. And that's mostly walking, right? Not everybody had a horse and galloped off like on Bonanza or the shows like that, Ponderosa. It was a lot of walking. It often gives me pause when I start thinking about some of the trials and tribulations that the early settlers. We have a lot to be appreciative for, a lot to be grateful for.
That's true. That's true.
Okay, so this area, right, Jason, is very close to our heart.
Yes,
Because of
Family reunion.
I think this is what Canada is all about. This is
Yeah.
about reuniting the family,
Bringing the families
bringing
together,
the families together,
as an immigrant.
regardless of where we all came from.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's
So can you tell us a little bit more about this area of the museum?
sure. This is our newest area, or biggest, newest area. It was developed in 2005. It was part of the celebration of the province turning 100. And what our exhibit designers brilliantly did, in my opinion, is they took a fictional family, the Worthy family, and they started following them throughout their life as they came to Canada. And as you and I had spoken about, well, I think we all three talked about the whole immigration experience. So one museum that we talked about was Pier 21, where a lot of newcomers to Canada would disembark. And
They were the ones coming from Europe.
yes, yeah, primarily Europe, that's true, yeah. And then they get on a train and they travel out to Western Canada. In our particular story that we're covering, Mr. Worthy actually went out first, and he went out and he proved his claim. So the Canadian government, I could spend a whole segment talking about what was going on in terms of that immigration policy, but to just bring everything together, the Canadian government was trying to populate Western Canada with Canadian people. And so they were offering tracts of land for no charge. So if you could make it to Canada, if you could find your land, and if you could prove it by meeting certain conditions, one of which being there had to be a dwelling or a house located on that property, then that property became yours. So quite often what would happen is people would come over from England, let's say actually quite a few young men came over from England, they proved their claim and they got their land, and then if they were married, they would send for their family. And a year later, or however long, the family would come out and they would join the father who was busy setting up their new home. It's quite, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but some of these poor wives were coming from large European centers, and then they were taking a train ride out to
Nowhere.
yeah, out to nowhere, exactly. They get off the train and then they're met by their husband, who takes them out again into the middle of nowhere and shows them a house that he's made out of sod, basically grass, and that's going to be their home for the first couple of years until they get their feet under them. They start doing some farming, maybe some cattle raising, and then starting to grow. So I think for me the brilliance of this particular display is we go with the Worthy family and we travel through the decades all the way up to 1980s time period, 1980s, 1990s.
For their children and grandchildren.
Exactly, yeah. So while we were talking about the whole Filipino experience,
Which is
and-
pretty much the same.
Yes.
Usually the husband
Mhm.
or the other spouse would get a work permit, would be hired by a Canadian company,
Yeah.
and then maybe a year later, the rest of the family would follow.
Yes.
So that's still the pattern of migration, at least coming from the Philippines.
Yeah, yeah. It's so it was interesting when we were talking the parallels we were discovering of the turn of the century experience and the turn of the century experience, right? Of course, we're not traveling around in wagons that are pulled by
No, not
horses.
anymore.
We've got airplanes, we've got jets and stuff like that, but very similar pattern, definitely.
All right.
Ernesto had some questions about getting married again.
Getting married? He's not married yet.
I'm not married
Oh, I
yet.
thought you were married.
No.
Oh, well, silly me. So when you do decide to get married, actually, that's the neat thing about this particular exhibit here on BOOMTOWN Street. The street that we're on right now is a street that you should see, or would have seen, I should say, at the turn of the century. So generally speaking, there was a train station at one end, and then at the other end, there was a hotel. And if you look at downtown Saskatoon, it's kind of interesting too, because on 21st Street, you have the Delta Besborough Hotel at one end, and at the other end was where the former train station actually was. So if you look at the facade of the Midtown Mall, it's actually set up to look like a train station. And the whole idea, it was like brilliant on, I believe it was the Canadian Pacific Railway that put it all together. Or was it Canadian National? Anyways, the train had a train station at one end, and so you ride the train, you get off the train, well, you need someplace to stay. Oh, well, look, just down at the end of the street is a hotel that the train company happens to own. So I used to joke that they get you coming and going that way. So getting back to the church, this is one of the only exhibits in BOOMTOWN that is an actual church that was brought in. I believe it was brought in from Hanley, Saskatchewan. Hanley. And yeah, it was installed as part of the facade of BOOMTOWN Street. Now, the other buildings that you see on BOOMTOWN Street have all been constructed by our volunteers. And they're not original. However, we did use original plans when we were actually constructing these things. So, yeah, so it's kind of a neat little exhibit on the street. And inside, I don't know if we want to take a look inside.
Maybe we should take a look inside.
Yes, let's go mga Pinoy channel.
It's very, very tiny. So I'll wait out here because I've seen it.
Oh, they've seen it a few times. Maybe 1,000 times. Okay. So mga Pinoy channel, nandito tayo sa inside ng St. Peter's Church. This is actually one of the original structure here in BOOMTOWN, according to Jason here. Ayan. So
who might this guy be?
Oh, who is this?
Oh, that's just a deacon or a
Okay.
priest or a minister. Actually, I believe it's an Anglican church. So, and he's getting ready to deliver the homily for Sunday. The interesting thing about this church too is the altar is still consecrated. So we do have people coming in here with small wedding parties, and they can actually arrange to book this and use this as their church in which to get married. So it's a neat exhibit here at the Western Development Museum.
So how many people can fit in this church?
Actually counting.
Yeah.
I was counting. It was 12.
I think
About
it's
20.
20,
25.
Oh, yeah, and that all depends if you're sitting or standing.
That's right.
Too. Most people like to sit, so the wedding parties are quite small.
Yeah.
What's this thing? The heater. It's I would imagine firewood.
Maybe.
Firewood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of the structures that are on BOOMTOWN Street, amazingly, would have been heated by stoves or heaters. And yeah, so someone would show up before the church service, and they would stoke the fire and get the place warm. And then, of course, as we found in a number of our catering halls, once you have a bunch of people in a small room, they too start to heat it up. And, yeah, makes it survivable, sort of thing.
Or two.
With regards to this particular house, people come out onto the prairies, and even today, when you look around the prairies, what do you see? You see a lot of grass.
Still, yes.
Yeah, you don't see very many trees. You don't see too many forests, unless you're starting to get up into northern Saskatchewan. So we're kind of in the middle of Saskatchewan, and what the people decided to do was actually cut up the grass or the sod and construct a house on it. For those of you who don't know what sod is, I guess we could explain it as when your lawn dies at your house and someone contacts a sod company who brings out pieces of grass and they lay it down in kind of squares or rectangles, and you have your instant lawn. Well, rather than laying it out for an instant lawn, what they did was they actually, and this is kind of neat too, is they kind of flipped it over, and so the grass would actually grow for a bit into the other grass, and that gave your house a little structural integrity. You'll also see on the roof they actually use that as a shingle to form the roof. There was some wood involved in the construction, and then if you go inside, the settlers would kind of whitewash the wall and make it smooth and smoother. There's all sorts of stories about these sod houses and adventures that people have. One of my favorites, though, is there was a family that came out in the fall, and they knew winter was coming. They wanted to get their house up, and so they were feverishly putting together their sod house. And they managed to get into it, and everything was good. These houses have a really, really high insulation value. So in the winter, if you have a nice stove, you'll be very warm. And in the summer, they're actually quite cool. They'll keep the heat out. Well, anyway, spring comes along, and the lady of the house was busy doing something, and she turned and looked at one of the walls, and she said the wall was moving. And she looked closer, and it was full of snakes. And what they think happened was, while they were building the sod house, they had actually used grass from a hibernaculum where the snakes were all wintering together, and they kind of moved indoors. But during the winter, it's cold, right? So they're just kind of chilling, I guess, chilling out in the wall, and they didn't notice them. But once things started heating up, they were ready to start exploring. Apparently, she got a wood house shortly thereafter. It's really weird how that kind of works, but yeah, they're.
Is that a really true story?
Yeah, that's a historical account. Oh yeah. There's lots of lots of garter snakes, bull snakes, and stuff.
They're
like
not
that.
poisonous.
No, they're not. If you go further south, in southern Saskatchewan, for example, at Grasslands National Park, there's rattlesnakes there, and there's a lot of them. Yes, they are. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look inside.
Sure. One thing you'll notice too, Ernesto will for sure notice, is just how big. You see this massive structure, and you think, oh, this is going to be a huge church, and then you go inside, and it's like, wow, is this ever tiny? And again, it's because of the materials you're using to construct your house.
This was constructed by real sod, right? Not really.
I actually think we did use real sod, but we coated it with like a plastic substance.
Okay, just to.
And this could be a really huge house too. Some of the sod houses are really quite small. Again, you're working with whatever construction materials you have. So if you have a lot of wood, yay. If you don't, you shrink things down.
Well, this land was when somebody's given land, when a family's given land to till, it was calculated what the machine like that can do at that time.
Right.
Just wondering, like when we started to have combines and stuff like that with things.
And that's a cool thing about our agricultural machinery display. You kind of see, you see the display starting off with a simple plow like that. And then you see, oh, okay, we've got a simple plow like that. Why don't we put two plows on? And then you start to see people looking at what they're using, coming up with new ideas, and then trying to improve on that. So it's like the tractors, Wow, that's interesting because the tractors started off quite big, and then they started getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And we just passed a tractor out there that is just massive, but the horsepower for it is like tiny compared to today's yard tractor. We were talking about our smartphones and things like that. Like, you guys probably remember the brick phones, right? You walk around with a suitcase to talk to people. And now everybody's got one in their front pocket or their back pocket. So, yeah, it's a history.
So Jason, so where are we right now?
Well, this is
Not your kitchen.
one of my favorite displays. I've got a lot of favorite displays on. This one deals particularly with the 1950s and the rural electrification of Saskatchewan. This is a time in Saskatchewan's history where we adopted electricity, and we got it out to not only the people in the cities, because a lot of the cities did have their own electrical generation plants and stuff like that. But this is a period in Saskatchewan history where the farms were getting electricity as well. And we have a very, very neat display that illustrates that. Now you have to have patience though. A lot of people come in, they see it, they go, oh, I'm off, I'm going to go do my thing. But if you wait, in the words of a famous person I know, Vanessa, wait for the magic. And it will happen.
It will.
It will.
Come on, Ernesto, let's go and see it.
Alrighty. We're back, mga Pinoy channel. So we're done with the tour inside the museum.
And thank you very much,
Thank
Jason.
you so
Oh,
much,
you're very
Jason.
welcome. No,
Yes.
thanks for being my guest.
And I am hungry, thanks God we have a cafe in the museum.
BOOMTOWN Cafe. There you go.
That's kind of a cool thing about families coming to the museum. We have a lot of young families and a lot of children. And what's really amusing for me is the children come, they've been here before, they know exactly where they're going to go, and they take off, they have their mom in tow and siblings in tow, and they go exploring. So they explore for maybe an hour, maybe more, and then they get hungry, so they come into the BOOMTOWN Cafe, which is decorated to be, or to resemble a 1910 cafe. So there's quite a bit of ambiance in it. They'll come in and they'll have some french fries and onion rings or a small snack or something like that. And then they recharge and they head back into the museum and finish their visit. In particular, during the winter time, there's a lot of young mums who are very clever young mums that know they can bring their children to the museum, and the children can explore in a safe, family-friendly environment, and they can be warm, and they're not cooped up in a house. So for all the new mothers out there in television land, this is a great place to bring your family. We have family memberships too that are really for the price, and of course I'm representing the museum, but I believe the family membership is $70. If you get it for 2 years, it's $120, and that allows you all sorts of benefits, discounts in our gift shop, discounts in the cafe, and it allows you a place to come and enjoy history
All year round.
anytime all year round. Except for Mondays. We are closed Mondays in January to March, but other than that, yep, we're open 9 to 5 every day of the week.
So aside from the BOOMTOWN Cafe, I also noticed you have halls that people can use.
Yeah, we're really quite fortunate that we do have a number of catering facilities that we use for special events, meetings, group gatherings, and stuff like that. I've heard rumor that the Filipino community likes to get together.
Exactly, like parties.
Parties!
Yeah,
Yes,
we like parties.
Sorry?
We like parties.
Yes. I've heard that. And we were talking about the 18-year-old girls coming out and those parties. And we have hosted some of them, and whew, it's incredible. You guys know how to party. It was, yeah, I can still remember that one event, and it was a very good party. Very well. So we have a big hall that can accommodate up to, I think it's 400 people sitting, and a little over that if you're doing something like a presentation or something like that. Then we have McLeod Hall, which is a smaller hall. I think that holds about 60 to 70 people.
Okay.
And then we have a balcony area where we have Palace Theater, which is another, that's more for meeting rooms, breakout sessions, stuff like that. And then along the balcony, we often use that for catered events. So a lot of people with a smaller group, again around 60 people, can have a banquet type meal or a buffet style meal, whatever, overlooking BOOMTOWN Street. And the cool thing too is at the museum, if you have a function that has food service associated with it, you also get a free tour of the museum as well. That's part of your
Part of the package.
It's part of the
That's
package.
right.
Yeah, so there's always something to see and do here at the Western Development Museum.
My favorite here, Ernest, is the one you do at Christmas, the Christmas tree festival.
Oh yeah, the
Is
Festival
it
of Trees.
still going to happen this year?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Actually, I haven't been here on Christmas.
Really?
Yeah, the Christmas tree festival. I've heard a lot of good things.
It's just on those
But,
occasions that I was able to come
oh,
here.
Yeah. And one of our favorite exhibits is the we have a Christmas display by the Eaton's department store, and back in the day they used to decorate their store windows. Well, actually they decorated the store with all these different displays, and they donated those displays to the Western Development Museum. And starting November 1st, we set them up in one of our galleries, and it's a Christmas tradition for a lot of people in
Nice.
Saskatoon. And we do keep it open until just after Ukrainian Christmas too. So it starts November 1st and it runs all the way to second week in January. So lots of things to see and do, and yeah, we like to brag that we've got something of interest for toddlers all the way up to seniors.
Cool. So Jason, so for those who haven't been here, so when is the hours of operation for Western Development Museum?
Okay, we're open from 9 to 5, Monday to Sunday, except again for the months of January, February, March when we're closed Mondays. And after Thanksgiving, actually Thanksgiving, we start closing on statutory holidays. But other than that, we're always open and people are more welcome to come in and see what we do here.
Ayan, mga ka-Pinoy channel. So, Western Development Museum, we'd like to thank Jason here for
Yes.
touring us around, and this is a cool place to visit. Lots of history, cool stuff, new stuff, actually old new stuff.
Yes.
So very interesting.
Well, if you want to know anything about history of Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
This is the place to be, lalo na sa mga immigrants or lalo na sa
Yes.
mga kababayan natin na bago nandito sa Saskatoon, and they want to see a place that about the history of Saskatchewan, Saskatoon, and area. This is the place to be, mga ka-Pinoy channel.
So ayan, thank you very much mga ka-Pinoy channel, and stay tuned. Maraming
Magbabalik po kami.
Magbabalik po
Yes.
kami.